You know you're having a good night when the chairman of your board comes and he wears not one but two pieces of swag about companies that, let's say, didn't go so well. Although he had a very successful career, hence the fact that he's the chairman of the board of the Computer History Museum. But Lynn Shustak is here tonight, and he's wearing a couple of things. If you see him afterwards, I hope you'll say hello to him. One of the really wonderful things is a kind of maroon-colored windbreaker that says Nestar on the back. If you never heard of Nestar, there's a reason you never heard of Nestar. It has nothing to do with Lynn or his ability to build an organization like this, but thanks to all of you who wore swag tonight. The history of computing and the history of entrepreneurship, especially here in Silicon Valley, are so closely related in so many ways that it's often hard to tell them apart. And that's why our new Exponential Center has begun its work here in the museum. We're highlighting that work tonight in this transformational area of innovation and entrepreneurship. And Exponential really evokes the kind of spirit that we're trying to capture with our work. Not only the exponential success that can occur when things go well, but the exponential transformation that can happen in the world, especially the way that it happens in Silicon Valley. And it's a great pleasure for us to add to that this evening. We have a large group here from the invitation of our NextGen board. NextGen is a really important part of the effort at the museum and what we're doing. And the co-chair of our NextGen board, Veronica Pynchon, is here tonight, and she's going to kick things off. So please join me in welcoming Veronica Pynchon. Hi, welcome.
Hi, everyone. As John said, I'm Veronica, and I'm co-chair of the NextGen board here at the museum. To introduce our speakers tonight, I'm going to share with you all some numbers. Our first speaker is an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, a board member, an author, and a mentor. 100,000 is the number of business plans that have been reviewed by Garage Technology Ventures since they opened. 5 is the number of separate funds Garage Technology Ventures has raised, including the Global Innovation Fund, which invests in social innovation. 20 is the number of profit and nonprofit organizations on which he served as a board member. And 1998 is the year he co-founded Garage Technology Ventures. 18 years he spent as a serial entrepreneur. And on a personal note, 20 seconds is what he claims is all you have to interest a potential investor. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Bill Reichart, the Garage Technology Ventures Managing Director and co-founder. Our next speaker is a technology entrepreneur. She's a business leader who's worked on groundbreaking technologies and is an advisor to startups and government leaders. She founded Marimba Inc., which is an internet software pioneer, and she led that company to profitability, IPO, and an eventual $239 million acquisition by BMC. 30 is the number of years that she has experience in developing software. 9 million is the number of developers that are using Java today, which she helped to launch. 2011 is the year that she was named to the Obama administration's Innovation Advisory Board. 6 is the number of companies that she served on as a board member. On a personal note, at the young age of 14 was when she began her lifelong passion as a dancer. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Chairman of CrowdSmart, former CEO of SpikeSource, and co-founder of Marimba, Kim Polizzi. Our third speaker of the evening is a serial internet entrepreneur, and he's founded companies in live video, mobile social, music, gaming, and on-demand services. He's also an investor and an advisor for startups. One of his companies, Twitch, was acquired by Amazon for $970 million. 5 is the number of different companies that he's founded. Since 2014, he's been a partner at Y Combinator. His earliest company, Kiko, was founded in 2005. During its peak in 2008, his company, Justin.tv, enjoyed 30 million monthly viewers. And on a personal note, Justin shared that 25 is the number of days since he got married, So could you please join me in congratulating and welcoming to the stage Y Combinator partner, Justin.tv and Twitch co-founder, Justin Kan. And finally, leading us through the conversation tonight is the founding executive director of the Exponential Center, Marguerite Gong Hancock. Marguerite has been working in the field of entrepreneurship and innovation for more than 2 decades. First at Stanford's Institute for International Studies and Graduate School of Business, and now at the Computer History Museum. She has spoken at academic and industry conferences in more than a dozen different countries, and is co-editor of 3 books published at Stanford. Please join me in welcoming Marguerite to the stage.
Well, to begin our night, welcome to each of you. It's a pleasure on behalf of the Exponential Center to say that we're passionate about preserving the legacy and lessons of entrepreneurship and innovation here in the Valley, and equally passionate about inspiring the next generation of entrepreneurs. So it's a particular pleasure to collaborate with our Next Gen board for tonight. And thank you to Veronica and Sunil and all the Next Gen members. So our topic tonight, the Day of the Dead, is Halloween, and we're going to be celebrating failure and talking about postmortems here in the Valley. Here in Silicon Valley, failure is a way of life. Research shows that 70 to 90% of startups fail. And failure is not just a badge of honor for its own sake, but can be turned into a stepping stone on the path to success. As Mark Andreessen once tweeted, "My goal is not to fail fast. My goal is to succeed over the long run." They are not the same thing. We'll be talking about that. Yet in the pursuit of success, even entrepreneurs known for their wild success have had failures of many stripes: fizzles, flops, false steps, even fraud. Some are fatal, some are hard-won lessons on the way to the next big thing. So I'm delighted to be leading this conversation with 3 remarkable people. They're serial entrepreneurs, advisors, and investors. So let's get started with our discussion about postmortems. We all have our favorite failure stories, and I'm glad that some of you brought your swag or wore it. I brought mine.
Oh, yeah. Wow, where'd you get that?
Okay. For those of you who recognize, Pets.com was one of the best epic failures of the internet era. It burned through $300 million of investment capital. In its first fiscal year, it raised revenues of $619,000 and spent $11.8 million on ads alone. Its business model was such that the sales price of its products were only 1/3 of the price that it was paying for the products. And so not surprisingly, it went from IPO on NASDAQ to total liquidation in 268 days. Its 2000 Super Bowl ad, when asked why an online pet store, the puppet said, "Because pets can't drive." So in that spirit, it's sometimes easy to talk about other failures, but tonight we've asked Bill, Kim, and Justin to talk about failures that they've experienced in their own lives on the ways to success. So I wanted to start with asking each of you to start with Bill. Tell us about one of your failures, what it was, and what was the nature of the failure.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many to choose from, right? As was indicated before, I started 5 venture-backed companies as an entrepreneur. And then since we started Garage, we winnowed that 100,000 number of business plans down to about 150 companies that we've invested in over the years. And so, as it turns out, a couple of those actually have been failures, I got to admit. But the one that I think would be sort of an interesting story, my favorite story to tell, because it has a semi-positive, ending to it, but is a company called Infa Technology. Now, there's a distant chance, anybody here, and I haven't noticed anybody here who was part of the team. Anybody? So no, nobody's raising their hand. So I can tell the truth, right? So I jumped into Infa shortly after my second company, a company called The Learning Company, went public. And so I thought, I got this startup thing down, public, cool, but now I want to do some real technology. So the story of Infa, it's 1990. It's 1990. And so imagine if you could build a computer. It was just a screen, just a 10.5-inch screen, no keyboard. And you interacted with this computer just by touching the screen.
Imagine.
Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool if you could, if you could build that product? So we built that product. We had this unbelievable team of engineers out of digital equipment. Their claim to fame was they built all the software for the war room in the basement of the Pentagon. Unbelievably smart guys. And we borrowed a bunch of technology from SRI. SRI is really good for that. But and we built this prototype, which we called our initial name. We called it the Portfolio, because we put in this leather binding. And I took it around the country, and everybody drooled when they saw this thing. They go, "Oh my God, you're kidding!" So I went, I went to architecture firms, I went to engineering firms, I went to stock trading firms, I went to law firms, I went to banks, I went, talked to everybody, and everybody, to a person, they saw this demo, and they thought, "Wow, that's amazing. How much is it?" So we thought maybe we could, not almost in the pets.com model, if we just got it out the door, we could sell it for, $4,999, right? And everybody said, "Oh, okay, we'll buy one." So I went back, to the office and told this horrible story of the fact that nobody's going to buy this thing, right? It's because the engineers in the audience can appreciate it's 1990. We actually had touch screens, but back then the touch screen alone, the 10.5-inch touch screen cost $1,200, raw, bare metal, whatever, and then you had to have a computer that ran it, right? So that was challenging. So one of the engineers says, I've got it. And he plops down his Filofax on the conference room table. Now, this is going to divide the world into those who know what a Filofax was, and then millennials, right? So Dave said, okay, if we shrink the screen down to like 5 inches, do the math, right? So the cost declines with the square of the diameter. We could get something out the door for maybe, $7.99. What we're going to do is we're going to shrink it down to a smaller form factor, and instead of this Filofax, for those of you who don't know Filofax, so Dave's Filofax was this leather thing. A Filofax is where you kept your calendar, your appointment calendar, and all your contacts and all the people you knew, and then you would take notes in it and you would put notes in it. And so Dave had this Filofax that was stuffed with notes and sticky notes and all of that, and he said, what if we designed a product that, it was like a 5-inch screen, but it was a special purpose. You could touch the screen and it would keep your calendar and your contacts, and you could take notes. Wouldn't that be a clever idea? So we go, wow. So then all the VCs come in. I'm sorry, this is taking long. So all the VCs come in, and we had Bill Gates came down, and he took a look at us along. He went to visit Go, and he went to visit some of the other guys. And Pierre Lamond came in, good old Pierre. And basically Pierre at the time he was at Sequoia. Pierre was the co-founder of AMD, National. What was he? National. Pierre was so then a partner at Sequoia. Pierre looks at this and says, "This is not a real computer." Pierre, you're not in the audience, sorry. Sorry. I love Pierre. Great guy. Brilliant, contributor to. In any case, Pierre is French. But Pierre looks at this thing and basically says, that's not a real computer. This is a toy. This is not a real computer. And, and just and air went out of, the air went totally out of the entire company at that point. And so we didn't make it. We hit a wall, and the team went on to Apple, and they built this kind of interesting little toy called the Newton. And so the reason INFA is my favorite story is because I sort of feel like I was there for the invention of this. But, the lesson, of course, is that the technology was obvious. It was obvious that we were going to have, a notepad computer at some level. People were talking about it all the time. It was obvious that this had to happen somehow. But the time frames were just way, way, way wrong. And so, one of the challenges of imagination here in the Valley is we can envision this future, and we always think this future, it's got to be right around the corner, right? Any day now, we're going to have the roads filled with autonomous cars, right? No, we're not. It's going to take a lot longer. And so, one of the horrifying lessons of my early career was that contrary to what we talk ourselves into, technology just takes a lot longer than we hope or think very frequently. And we can have that debate if you want. But
Thank you, Bill. Great story of technology. Kim, tell us about a failure.
Well, I'll follow on to that because that was such a great prototypical Silicon Valley story. I mean, it's true that every great Silicon Valley company is built on the learnings, the insights, the mulch, of dozens of companies that didn't work out or products that didn't see the light of day, and that's just a fact. Because you're absolutely right. I think the curse of the entrepreneur, of the innovator, is that you can see what's going to happen. You know it's going to happen. You're eager and you're impatient to get there, and you think it's going to happen a lot sooner than it will. And so my story is Java, actually, because Java was a series of failures on the way to success, but in the most unexpected way. And it was the same kind of scenario where there was a group of brilliant developers, actually it's Sun, who told Scott McNealy they were going to go start a new company to build the software platform of the future for a networked world that didn't yet exist, and this ubiquitous network that would connect us all, and devices and household devices, everything would be connected. News, information, entertainment would come through this wonderful network. But we needed a software platform that would run all of that. So Scott convinced them to stay. Actually, Steve Jobs was trying to recruit them to come to Next to build this thing. Scott convinced them to stay. Actually spun out a separate company from Sun called First Person. It was located downtown Palo Alto. It was a skunkworks project. No one at Sun really knew about it. Very few people did. And they built this amazing software platform. I got a sneak peek of what they had built and it was a prototype at an internal conference, and realized this thing was revolutionary. They needed a product manager. I came on board. My job was to make Java ubiquitous. It was called Oak at the time. Take Oak and, just a simple thing, just make it ubiquitous. The problem was there was no platform to take it to market. There was the Newton. The Newton was the handheld device platform of the time, but Java wasn't going to fit into a Newton. There was the set-top box, but the set-top box was a $25,000 SGI machine, not ready for consumer ubiquity. And we kept trying to find a platform to get Java out to the world, because it was ubiquity or go home. There was no sort of middle ground. And basically, at a certain point, it became clear that we weren't going to figure this out. One thing that was important that had happened was that I had gotten a bunch of data as a product manager. I realized I've got to sort of avoid any assumptions about where the internet superhighway is, the information superhighway as it was called at the time, and get some data. And it turned out there was this nascent thing called the internet, and it was AOL, it was CompuServe, it was the public internet, which was not very widely used, but that's where the exponential growth was happening. So I told the team, we've got to port this thing to the desktop. Not a popular decision or recommendation, because everyone wanted to work on the cool, sexy platform of the future, not the boring old PC, especially at Sun. It was like, the PC was the Antichrist. It was just, you do not port software to the PC. But basically the team at a certain point, realized, yes, that is where the platform of the future right now is. And we got it ported. The problem was that there still wasn't a vehicle to get Java out to the world. And so ultimately, the plug was being pulled. The team was being downsized. We were being reorged back into Sun. It was pretty clear the writing was on the wall. You can't keep funding something like this indefinitely. Well, just in the nick of time for the group that hung on, Mosaic came along, and we downloaded it and realized that we could rewrite the browser, make it interactive, and bring interactivity to the web. And that basically changed everything. And we went from being a project that was about to be canceled to being really a platform that then became a very central theme of Sun's strategy as a company. And it all changed, I mean, literally overnight. But what went into that changing overnight was incredible persistence on the part of the team, because people just did not want to give up. We knew we had something really powerful, and we were going to do anything and everything to get it out to the world. And they were going to have to drag us away. So persistence was one. And then luck. I mean, just the luck of the timing of Mosaic coming along at that moment. And then the third piece of it was the developers, because we reached out to a bunch of developers, got them to write some applets and demonstrate the power of what actually the internet could be. And when people saw the first applets and saw animations in a web page and saw the image of a human body, and you move the mouse over it and you could see MRI slices, imagine doctors collaborating remotely over the internet and a spreadsheet calculating the value of a portfolio in real time. Wow, it's not just about hyperlinking to text. You can actually really, run real applications across the internet and collaborate. So that was kind of the turning point. And the road there was not at all smooth. It was not obvious how we were going to get this out to the world, but it was necessary to take that bold leap up front. I give also Scott McNeely and Bill Joy and the Sun management a lot of credit for taking such a huge risk to create a whole company around a technology that wasn't clear we knew how to get it out to the world, but it ended up working out in the end. But very typical story of near misses, luck,
death.
timing, near death.
Thank you.
Kim cheated. You cheated. You lived in the end, right?
We lived in the end.
Yes.
We did live in the end. Yes.
She cheated death. She cheated death.
Okay, you cheated.
All right,
death.
Justin, you're up.
We can talk about many more failures.
So failure story. I guess I'll talk about my first company, which most people don't know that much about. I started off in college in 2005. One of my friends came to me and said, we have all this free time. We have so much, our opportunity cost is extremely low, so we should start a company. We didn't really have a company in mind. He just said, we should start a company. We have access to all this intellectual capital, is how he put it. He's this guy who's he's an investor, he now works at Soros, he's a hedge fund manager, so he's always looking for arbitrage, opportunities. He's the type of person, he likes Japanese candy just because he thinks it's undervalued. So he came to me and said, let's start a company. We didn't know anything about starting a company, and we didn't know anything about starting an internet company. It wasn't as popular then, especially on the East Coast. And so we said, okay, let's brainstorm ideas. We came up with this idea. Gmail had just come out, and so we thought someone should make a calendar that's like the calendar accompaniment to Gmail, like an online calendar that looks like Outlook, has a modern interface. And we thought, it's such a great idea, no one would ever think of it. So we kept it secret, but we told our one friend who, we need a programmer, right? When people ask, Justin, are you a programmer? I'm like, I'm a shitty programmer, I'm a decent web developer. We needed someone who actually knew what they were doing, so we went to a friend of ours, Emmett Shear, who's also someone I grew up with and was at college with us, and we recruited him for this idea, because he was a computer science major. Little did we know that he was maybe one chapter ahead of where I was. And so we started working on our calendar, not knowing what we were doing, not knowing anything about building JavaScript web apps. There weren't very many examples at the time. Mostly cobbling together something that worked out of Googling tutorials on things like how to make an object drag and drop in JavaScript and the DOM.
You should have called Kim.
Yeah, if only you had known.
Should've. We didn't know anyone. We didn't know even that we knew we had a startup or a tech company, but we didn't know how to get funding. And 6 months later, we had a pretty crappy demo, actually, in retrospect, but something that looked cool and not like anything that we'd seen on the web. And one of our friends, sent us an email from a new angel investing company called Y Combinator that was running a program in Boston for the first time where they would invest in tech companies, especially ones started by young people who didn't know what they were doing.
Check.
So we were like, yes, that sounds familiar. We applied. Stayed up all night, like filling out the application the last night, and we applied, and they came back to us, and PG wrote us an email. Paul Graham wrote us this email that said there were 3 kinds of companies. The first kind, founders who had smart ideas, good ideas, and they seemed competent. Second kind of company, people who didn't have very, very good ideas, and they didn't seem very good. And the third category was people who seemed okay, but have very bad ideas. And you are in the third category. So
Body blows.
Luckily, he said, we thought you were okay, so maybe you'd like to come and maybe do something, a different idea. And we'd only been working on this for 6 months, so we were like, okay, whatever. Sure, we'll come up and talk to you. And then we went up there and interviewed, and I remember the interview was 40 minutes long at the time. Now Y Combinator interviews are only 10 minutes long, so I don't even know how they got through it. But it was 40 minutes long, and we spent the entire time arguing with them. It was Paul Graham and the 3 other original partners of Y Combinator, Jessica Livingston and Robert Morris, who's a professor of computer science at MIT, Trevor Blackwell, and we spent the entire time arguing with them, and they said, JavaScript-rich apps on the client side in the web browser will never be popular. We thought it would be different. We'd see Gmail, and I think we convinced them, actually. So they funded us, and we went to work on our startup, Kiko, the web calendar, over the summer. There was a little problem, though. And the problem was that we weren't really building something for ourselves. When I was a college student, I was a senior, and I only had class. I had engineered it by a lot of hacks, that I only had class 2 days a week, Monday and Wednesday, from 10:30 to noon. So I could remember that. I didn't need a calendar to tell me when to go to class. And when we started transition to working full-time over the summer during the YC batch on our calendar company, our calendar looked like 9 to 9 p.m. programming, 7 days a week, So we didn't really know what anyone wanted, and we didn't think, we should go out and talk to business customers or people who are calendar power users about this. So we ended up building something that looked like Outlook on the web. It was pretty cool, and we launched it. But people tried it, and they maybe a few people used it, but it wasn't something that was a killer app. We never made it really great. And I remember 6 months after we launched, we ended up, through Paul's connections, because he sold his company to Yahoo, in conversations with Yahoo. And they had just bought a company, an email company, to compete with Gmail. They bought a company called Oddpost that did an Outlook-style email client, and they were looking to upgrade their calendar, which hadn't been changed in, I think, 8 or 9 years at the time, maybe like 8 years. And so they said, hey, we're looking to bring some people in and maybe work on our calendar. We know it sucks. We want to improve it. And we're like, well, we have a really cool, effectively demo of a modern-looking calendar in the browser. And so things progressed, and they were like, okay. The corp dev guy was like, we want to buy you. They came in, they interviewed us, talked to us about our vision for the calendar, brought us to Mountain View. And that was my first time in Silicon Valley, and they were like, we want to buy you guys. And I was like, this is great. I graduated from college 6 months before. They wanted to buy our company. That sounded good to me. So the corp dev guy for communications, his name is Kent Goldman. He called me. He said, Justin, how much do you want for the company? And I was thinking, I want $1 million for myself. I want $1 million for Emmett, my co-founder. Our third co-founder, who was the hedge fund guy, had decided to go work in finance. I think he thought we were like overvalued. But Yahoo called, so Ken said, okay, you want $2 million? He was like, how about $1 million? I was like, all right. I did not know very much about negotiation, framing. So he says, okay, I'll call you back. I'm going to get it together. I'm going to call you back tomorrow. Of course, I don't hear from him tomorrow. And I don't hear from him a couple days later either. And maybe a week goes by. I send him an email. I knew enough that I didn't want to sound too desperate, but I sent him an email like, where's the term sheet? All caps, question mark, question mark, question mark. And maybe a couple weeks later, he responds like, just hang in there. And then I never hear from him again. So, we thought we were going to walk away with $1 million in the bank, and which, to be honest, really would have been vesting over a certain number of years. And then we had some for the investors. So it wasn't really, what I learned, it was probably like a Silicon Valley job offer, maybe a rich one. But we ended up, struggling for the next 6 months. And during this time, we tried, we kind of gave up on the calendar. We hacked on different projects. I won't go into all of them. But 6 months went by, and another 6 months, and we were kind of lost. We didn't know what we should do. We didn't have any users. Gmail actually launched Google Calendar, which took all the few users that we did have. They were like, turns out you want calendar with your email. That's something I only learned after. So we lost the few users that we had. We were very demoralized, and we decided we needed to figure out how to pay back the small angel round we had raised, about $75,000. And so, for a lack of better idea, we decided, let's sell our company on eBay. So we listed the company on eBay, and we said, we have this many, we have this. There's an API. It works like this. It's, these are the features. It's hosted in, Ruby on Rails and JavaScript, and so we listed it. It got some attention because people were like, "This is so crazy. Why would anyone sell their company on eBay?" So it was on TechCrunch and Reddit at the time, which was much more tech focused. And we started getting calls, which I later learned are due diligence calls. People asking, is this for real? What does it actually? What's the technology behind the scenes? And so we didn't really know if it would work, but a couple days later, we got a bid. I was very excited. $50,000 was our reserve price. And then, the morning of, I am sitting in a friend's apartment in New York. The morning of the auction ending, demoralized. I remember it's 80. It's the summer in New York, so it was like 80 degrees in his apartment, maybe 85. Sitting there in my underwear. He has, like, everyone had desktop computers back then. It was like what was transitioning out. So I'm at his desktop computer. I'm hitting F5 on the eBay page, and click it, and then it just went up. It went up to like $85,000. I was excited. That means that we actually made money. we hadn't taken much of a salary the whole year, so it's tenuous, but it's positive. And then I refreshed again. It's like 100,000, 113, 150. All these numbers are burned into my brain. 185, 200, 213, and then finally it ended at $258,100. Yeah, $258,100. And I was like ecstatic. I'm jumping up and down. I was like, we got something, right? I thought we had invented a new business model. So, it was basically a year of failure culminating in a kind of success. I guess the success was really that we were able to pay back our investors. We basically made what we would have made working at a company. And then, it convinced me, Silicon Valley's not all that bad. Maybe we should start something new. And then we ended up starting Justin TV, which turned into Twitch, which is another, could go on forever. But that's my very first introduction to startups, and it was a failure, but it was very interesting.
Wait. The check cleared.
Check cleared.
The check cleared.
It was
Wait a second.
$268,000
These two
on
guys
eBay.
are cheaters. I was told I had to come in and talk about a failure.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about
We failed to
failure.
get users.
Oh, God. Jesus.
So let's dig a little deeper here on the failure side.
Yeah.
And think about this. Sometimes there are failures on the way to success. And sometimes it's hard to tell. We've talked about some of the issues that come up. Timing, lack of ability to execute, pricing, technology fail, whatever it is. But how can you tell the difference when you look at failures that you've had or that you've seen as an investor? How can you tell the difference between when you should persist or when it's time that it's flatlined to call it dead? Justin?
I think that's extremely difficult. There's so many companies out there that look like they're failing. They don't have any good ideas. I think you give up when you don't have any good ideas, right? Of what to do to move the company forward. But there's so many companies out there that are, they were on the edge of giving up. There was it was one day away from giving up, and it turned into something that was successful. I remember when we were working on Justin TV, live streaming site, my co-founder Michael used to advise this other company, and they would come around every couple months, or actually every couple weeks, and kind of show them the product. And they thought we were advanced because we had an office with 15 people in it, in a basically warehouse. They were like, these guys are so awesome. They have an office and they have employees. We want to be them. We were making no money, but all of life is relative. And so these guys would come around and they would look at, I review the product, I remember. So their site lets you rent floor space on someone's air mattress in someone's apartment, right? And so I remember their first payments flow. They were like, it was 50 fields. I think you had to fill out 35 fields to make an Amazon payment to book a place. It was like horrible. And they had spent a year and they were in credit card debt. They'd banged their heads against the wall. They'd launched multiple times and gotten traction, and then it went back down to zero. And they came to us at one moment when we were celebrating. We had just sold an advertising contract, biggest ever. It was like $50,000 for us. And we were like, let's go to dinner to celebrate. So they came with us, and they were like, we're out of ideas. Our company, Air Bed and Breakfast, it's not doing anything. It's getting no revenue anymore. Our revenue's like $200 a week. We're both in credit card debt. We're thinking we should give up.
They're trying to sell cereal too, right?
They had sold all the cereal, but they were still
That was a promo, right?
It was a promotion. It sold the cereal, but they were still failing, at the real business, not the cereal business. The cereal business, successful. But
The cereal business is good.
the airbed renting business, not doing so well. And my co-founder Emmett told them, you guys should apply for Y Combinator. And they said, isn't that for startups that haven't launched yet? Where it's just an idea. It's ironic because now I tell people, hey, apply for Y Combinator, they're like, we're not ready. No, you don't even know. Right. And so we convinced them they should do it. And I remember they went home. It was past the deadline, so we had emailed Paul and told him, hey, you have to look at this company. They went home, did the application, and then got funding from YC, which gave them this couple additional months and Paul's mentorship, and then that's when they started growing, right? And so those guys were, days, weeks from giving up on their startup. And I think it's extremely difficult to know when you should give up. And there's massive survivorship bias. So
Exactly.
ignore everything. If I'm like, yeah, you should do it. It worked out great for me, Don't give up.
So that's a huge question, right? For when to pull the plug, and the survivorship bias really makes a difference. Bill,
Right.
from your experience on both sides of it now as an investor,
Yeah.
what do you have to say about this?
So, okay, the happy story, right?
Well-
So we were the first investors in Pandora. And we'd like to talk about Pandora as an 11-year overnight success, right? So for those of you, so this is hopefully a really important Trivial Pursuit question. How many people know the original name of Pandora?
Music Video Project.
No, close. Thank you for playing. Anybody?
Savage Beast.
Savage Beast. The original name was Savage Beast. And it was, two graduate students at Stanford and a guy out of LA who had this brilliant idea called the Music Genome Project to be able to deconstruct music to create a music discovery technology that could not be replicated by computers. And, long story short, they died multiple times. And you know, the difference was, you know, it's not that they ever ran out of ideas. You know, of course, they started during the bubble. That was, you know, that sort of set expectations the wrong way, because everything seemed to be easy during the bubble. And then there was a nuclear winter that was really hard, and you had to just reset all your expectations. But the key, you know, by far the key was Tim Westergren is the most unbelievably resilient, persistent son of a bitch, nice guy. I mean, the resilience of that guy was so impressive at just always figuring out a way to survive and, you know, figuring out a way to get to the next step. And that's, you know, it doesn't really answer the question, because everybody thinks they could be resilient. And, you know, there's something, this integration of resilience and persistence that just enabled him to keep finding opportunities of hope and ways to get to the next level, to live, to fight another day. And so that's core in our investment philosophy, is looking at teams that have that deep resilience. And core to that, we think, is been the founding mantra of Garage from the beginning, which is, when you're starting a company, it's critical that you focus on creating value, not on making money. And if you have that focus on creating value, it's a frame of reference that is wildly different from a money-making frame of reference, and, you know, gives you motivation to get up in the morning, as opposed to kind of just looking at your checking account and your credit cards and deciding this is a monetary thing.
So there's inner passion and there's persistence and resilience. When you talk about failing fast, it sounds like it's very painless, and yet for anybody who's been in the middle of it, it's gut-wrenching, right? So what are the other attributes that you look for to really be able to turn failure into something that you can live another day? Kim, we've talked about resilience. What are some other attributes of people who can survive failure and then use it as a stepping stone to what's next?
Well, I think, you know, what Justin and Bill said just is resonating a lot with me. I'm thinking about several different experiences. But to answer your question, I think a lot of it is the people you have around you. I mean, for me, it's are you able to assemble a group of people who are willing to stick it out together and who believe so much in the value of either what you've created or the idea that you have, that you're working on building. It's hunkering down together, you know, that gets you through those times. And lots of times they're just circumstances outside of your control. And for example, when the bubble burst, I'm thinking about, you know, Marimba. We had just gone public, and then our market cap was like overnight a fifth of what it was the day before, and nothing had changed about the business. And it was kind of like Silicon Valley was going crazy. A lot of the smartest VCs on Sand Hill Road were kind of running for the hills. And a lot of the kind of feeling was, it's all ending. Enterprise software is dead. That was often said. Internet advertising is dead. Do you remember that one? Yeah, I mean, people were walking around saying stuff like this. And we were an enterprise software company. We were profitable. We had 50 million in revenue, 60 million in the bank, no debt. And suddenly our stock price was actually lower than the cash we had in the bank. We had no debt. I mean, that's how crazy the world had gone. And at this point, our board had decided, you know what, since enterprise software is dead, you know, there's just not really a future in small cap software companies that are enterprise software companies, so we should really sell the company. And I and a core group of us, and you know, the team at Marimba felt otherwise. We felt that there was going to be a need for automated software delivery and management and devices and servers and data centers, and it wasn't called the cloud yet, but we could kind of see that thing was going to be, you know, we could probably apply our technology to where the world was going. So basically, I decided to get together an offer, basically a private a buyout offer. I went to some bankers. I told the board, I'd like to put an offer on the table. Figured out how to kind of assemble a buyout offer, and the bankers that I found, these private equity guys, were going, what? Why would you sell this company? But would love to buy it and help you take it private and ultimately take it public again or sell it. And so basically we did that. We realized that we've got something of value. We do have some control over the outcome here. You don't always, but in this case there was a vehicle which was taking the company private. And right at the moment where we were about to pull the trigger on that, the market lifted. Basically there was a moment during which suddenly rational sanity descended upon all, and everyone realized there is probably a future in software and internet advertising, all that stuff. And so the offer to sell the company, the board decided, let's not pursue that, let's go ahead and build a company. And ultimately we did sell, but several years later, and had a good outcome. But that lesson of, things can happen around you that have nothing to do with the value that you're building or the potential that you have, and you just have to accept that. Sometimes you don't have control over the outcome, and you have to accept that as well. But if you do, then use every tool in the toolbox. I mean, figure out a way to live another day and find people who also see the vision and the potential, and surround yourself with them, and keep forward momentum going.
Thank you. Justin, once you wrote, startups don't die, they commit suicide.
Yeah, I believe that. I think that people give up on, they don't die by homicide, they die by suicide. Most startups are not killed by their competition. They're killed because the founders run out of ideas and they give up they're discouraged and they don't know what else to do. And like Bill said, I really agree that it's, you have to be a survivor, right? It's not like you can make yourself one or like make yourself be the resilient survivor, but it helps if you are one, a lot. Because no company, only 1% of startups, or 0.1% is like a rocket ship that works forever. Most are very much a roller coaster, a sine wave emotionally, and you have to be the type of person that like sticks it out even when you have an irrational belief that you can be successful, even when things don't look very good. And most people are not able to do that, not willing to do that. Lots of, like we at YC, we fund so many companies. A lot of founders, after a year, they're like, they think, I don't have traction. My original plan didn't work out. I'm just going to return half the money to the investors or whatever it is, right? And they don't go into cockroach mode. They're having a successful company is not the most important thing in their existence. Maybe that's good. I think that actually can be very healthy for you as an individual, right? Mm-hmm. However, for your startup, it's not necessarily the best thing.
I'd like to pursue that in saying that this has been a pretty rosy conversation so far about postmortems, when we're really...
Well, that's because they cheated.
So I wanted to ask you, Bill, since you're willing to play the game and really thinking about kind of the dark days, can you share a dark day in the moment of failure, and then how did you reboot or sort of resurrect out of that moment? Advice that you have for people that are in the middle of the dark?
Well, interesting. Well, first of all, I just briefly to this last point. One of the things I want to say, somewhat controversially, is I think the reality is that for an awful lot of startups, they should give up. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, I just, I hate saying that. I hate saying that out loud. But I do come across these companies who they're going to face this dark day at some point in the not too distant future. Or maybe it won't even be dark. They just sort of one morning wake up and say, I'm going to do something different.
Or they're like the Walking Dead, the zombies. Or
they somehow, eke an existence, and eat brains or whatever they do. But it's it's an unfortunate experience that I've experienced all too often when you have that, it's 11:30 at night and you're sitting around the conference room table and things are looking really, really shitty. And usually, I mean, the thing that is the hardest, it's not hard failing. It's not hard failing. What's hard is firing people. I mean, that's the thing that really just eats your guts out. When you're sitting there at 11:30 at night and you're going, oh shit, we're not, we have to do something. And that something is all these people who believed in you, who you gotta say, we just don't have the money to keep paying you. And that, I guess it's a good thing because it's somehow cooked into our DNA, that hurts more than personal failure. But that's the toughest thing about this business, is because, and I have this conversation with entrepreneurs all the time that, things seem positive, and yay, it's fun, and it's nice, and it's easy starting up a company, because it's super easy to start a company, right? I mean, anybody can start a company. But, then you get some other people's money in, and now it's getting a little more serious, and then you hire people, and these people kind of depend on you, and then you let them down. And that's the hardest thing. That's the hardest thing.
This is an interesting question that somebody shared that wanted to hear your opinion on. Many conversations focus on failure for founders and executives, which is what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. But when a venture collapses, many parties are responsible and many more are damaged. So what can employees who aren't in the positions of leadership learn when there's a failure, when you're not in power? Kim?
There's nothing more educational than being part of a failed startup, I think, because and it's great if you can kind of learn from the sidelines and not be taking the arrows. And again, every company ultimately goes through some sort of turmoil. Even Netflix went through their heartaches, and I think just inevitably the market changes around you, or there's a misstep, there's an error, and I think the smartest employees are the ones that are paying attention during those times. And then you also see how the leadership reacts, and you learn what mistakes not to make. If you're paying attention. So it's not pretty. It's not fun being part of that experience. It's oftentimes you're ahead of the market, and then the bubble bursts and the money runs out, and you have investors that don't want to stay with it. But those lessons are just burned into you when you are part of that kind of experience. And when I'm hiring people, I look for people who've been through the fire, whether they founded a startup that didn't work or they were part of a company that went through a lot of turmoil, and they were there and saw that and experienced it, and learned lessons from it. So I think just paying attention, and again, those experiences are so much more valuable really than being part of success after success, because there's no straight path to a success.
Mm-hmm. You've each mentioned different companies that you've looked to, that you've seen that have failed, and I would like to just do a lightning round and just do it twice around the cycle, where you name a company or two companies, just the name of the company that you think is illustrative, that people can learn from their failures and the way they've pivoted or responded. Just because a writer, Michael Malone, wrote that the Valley is a graveyard of failure, and one of the greatest sort of gifts is for people to look at the failures that are here and really learn from it. So you shared your stories. What other companies could we look at? Justin, just name a company. We'll just go around.
Well, I don't know how easy it is without context, but I started a company called Exec, which is basically a failure, although we sold it for equity, so I don't know if that counts like in the cheating way. But jury's still out. But it failed to meet expectations, and I think that one, I don't want to, it might take too long, but we learned a lot from that, and like you were saying, how can employees learn from it? My brother who started the company with me, but I was really the person in charge, he had to do the negotiation to sell that company, and then, this year he applied the skills he learned to selling a company for scraps of equity, and he sold his company that he co-founded afterwards for $1 billion to GM, so he applied his skills from a failure to a successful negotiation.
Okay, let's think about exec.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kim?
Just to make sure I understand the question, are these companies that ultimately failed or that failed and then had a rebirth? Apple would be
Cheating
an
once.
example of that because, I mean, to me, Apple is such a great example of a company that was on the ropes, and the story of a founder coming back and taking that company to where it could go is so inspiring. I mean, to every entrepreneur and every entrepreneur that feels, you know, that they, what came after, if they got kicked out, was not better. And to be able to come back and retake, wow, what a story.
Great, thank you. Bill?
Well, so Kim took my my first round.
Sorry, Bill.
So I was gonna, you know, so I was gonna go Apple, and then I thought, boy, you know, here we are, right? Computer history sim. So, and I don't know what the lesson. I'm not sure I've incorporated all the lessons learned, but SGI should be an instructive case. And for those of you who don't know, this building was originally built by Silicon Graphics. This was, I don't know if it was supposed to be their headquarter building or not, but
It was.
Marketing, North American sales and marketing.
how about that, right? So, but yeah, so SGI, you know, for those of you who weren't around, I mean, it was a phenomenal, world-class, you know, hot shot, beautiful, wonderful success story, and then poof, right? I mean, and so it just shows that you know, as you know, technology at some level does shift from under your feet if you're not paying attention, and you know, you got to pay attention to these shifts in technology. Okay, that's one round.
That's good. We're going to just shift here that I want to ask also for a word of advice before we turn to the questions here. I asked each of you to do a word or a short phrase of advice for an entrepreneur. I'll start with you, Bill. Mm-hmm. Reveal and just give a 1-minute story about what advice would you give and why?
So, so my advice for entrepreneurs is try everything. So I don't know, were you in Nice? You weren't in Nice. Okay, good. Well, in any case, so this I stole from the, I believe it deeply. And what we were going to try to choreograph is to get Shakira to start singing while I'm talking. If somebody, there should be an app for this somewhere. Pandora? No, okay. In any case, you know, this has been part of the theme of the conversation today, which is that, you know, back to the original pen-based computing story, you know, we kept on, you know, we thought architects would need it or lawyers might need it. We just were trying everything. We resize it, change it, whatever. I know Donna Dubinsky was here. I don't know if she's here. She actually won playing that game. But you just got to keep trying everything. And this was the theme of a program I was part of this summer in Nice, a program in Nice in July that started early in July. And in the middle of the program, there were 480 students at this program in Nice. And the middle of the program was the Bastille Day attack in Nice. 3 of the students were killed. And at the end of the program, the students, however, got together and they decided that they were going to stick it out. They were going to complete the program, and they thought the way to make meaning out of this experience was to say, we are going to keep going forward. And at the very end of the program, on the last day, some of the students compiled a video of all the different video pieces during the program. And the theme of the video was try everything. And the music soundtrack illegally borrowed was Shakira's. Don't tell anybody. But it is one of the most powerful entrepreneurial videos I have ever seen, is to see, you know, to go to YouTube and EIA Nice, try everything. I think if you'll find it. But I just believe so deeply in all of those young entrepreneurs who just decided they were going to stick with it. They were going to be resilient, they were going to persist, and they were going to make meaning out of the experience they had working together to try to make the world a better place.
Thank you, Bill. Try everything. Kim.
Thank you. Okay, my word is persevere. Perhaps not surprising given some of the stories. But I've found that, any problem we're solving is going to take time. And there are going to be ups and downs and arrows from all sides and people that disappoint you and people that surprise you and delight you and a lot of things that are out of your control. And as long as you can hunker down and live to see another day and persist, and you got a good idea, you've got a pretty good shot at succeeding. And if you don't, you will kick yourself for the rest of your life wondering if you had given it a shot, what would have happened. So everything I have been part of that's worked has been a very bumpy road along the way. And there were so many times when we could have, and probably should have, from any kind of rational perspective, given up, but we didn't, and it worked out. Not every time, but the ones that worked out, this was the key ingredient.
Thank you. Persevere. We pass that to Justin.
All right. My piece of advice is just get started now. Put an exclamation point after now to emphasize that. Now. It's probably not surprising because, partner at Y Combinator, we fund startups when they're very early, but the thing that helped me the most was not that my first company was at all good. It was actually terrible, and we didn't know anything. We had no skills. We had no business model. But the thing is, we got started, and we just started working on it. We started figuring out how to do it. We taught ourselves as we went along. We hacked up, looked at JavaScript tutorials and hacked together a prototype. And that is what led, to me selling that company and then becoming an entrepreneur again and then eventually being successful. And so I always tell people the first step is the hardest. It helped me that to be an entrepreneur that I never had any job. I never had any opportunity costs, so I didn't know what my time was worth. So I could spend all my time just working on learning the skills to get a startup. And I started that process off by just getting started and taking that first step and starting a company. So I encourage you all to do the same.
Thank you. Well, let's get the audience into the conversation. This is a question. I'm going to start with you, Bill, with fielding this one. Can you share a lesson of what you would do differently or that someone else should have done differently that could have avoided failure?
Right. I guess I should have bought Tesla. I don't know. No. Yes. Okay. So the lessons. So one of the lessons that I've learned from the School of Hard Knocks
avoiding
failure is a variation on Justin's theme. Actually, it's sort of the next step on Justin's theme, which became one of the garage mantras, which was "Don't worry, as Guy Kawasaki likes to say, "Don't worry, be crappy." And so some of my biggest challenges in both some of the companies that I was involved with as an entrepreneur and many of the companies we've invested in is the problem that engineers in particular, God bless you, they want the product to be perfect before they get it out the door. And it was one of the things that it didn't save us in Infa was just getting this prototype out the door and getting it into the hands of these prospective customers and finding out what the hell they thought of this thing and realizing, before we spent any more money, realizing they weren't going to buy it. And at least we thought it gave us a chance when we went down to the small size. But nevertheless, it gives you a chance to survive, if you just get the product out the door. Don't worry, be crappy, get it out the door so that you have the chance to save yourself rather than burning up all your money and then, crossing your fingers with the launch. And so subsequent to Guy saying, don't worry, be crappy, Eric Ries decided to make it a little bit more academic. And so he said, no, you should have a minimum viable product. So that sounds... So the guys at Stanford, they didn't want to have a chapter that said, don't worry, be crappy, but they were happy with the idea of minimum viable products. But that's the idea, right?
Good lesson, good lesson. Kim, here's one for you. You sit on boards, and here's a question about the role of the board and investors for startups, where the board may be forcing to scale a startup too quickly, and maybe panic and fire the CEO. So what's the role of a board for either precipitating failure or rescuing failure?
So important. And as an entrepreneur, you learn that the board, you're entering a relationship with these people, a very close relationship. It's not about the money, it's about the people more than the money. I mean, you need the money to survive, but being very selective about who's around the table and the way that you communicate with each other and making sure that you've got, people that you feel a good connection with is critical up front. And obviously sourcing and making sure that you sort of did your diligence about the investors that you take on and you decide to work with is critical, number one. And then what to do when investors get impatient, I think is the question, right?
Yes.
And I think as an entrepreneur, it's important not to panic. It's important to, first of all, build relationships with each of those board members to make sure that they fully understand what you are working on, your strategy, and there's a rapport where you can go to them when things are challenging and you don't suddenly sort of face the board and have an unpleasant surprise happen, where there's a lot of communication back and forth, and where also you're viewing the board members as part of your team, not this sort of group that's off to the side, once a quarter, coming in, making judgments, and then leaving. So building those relationships with individual board members is critical. At a certain point, sometimes you can't convince the board that, as a founding CEO, you're the CEO that should take this company to $1 billion. And in that case, you have to accept it and keep the bigger picture. In the case of Marimba, I was the founding CEO. My board decided we needed to bring in a professional CEO after we had gone public, became profitable, and put $60 million in the bank. But their view was we need someone who knows how to take a company to $1 billion. You haven't taken a company to $1 billion. And ultimately, while I didn't necessarily agree, I accepted it. We brought in a professional CEO, then the bubble burst, and he left after 6 months. So maybe that wasn't the best decision on the part of the board. But I understood at a certain point that I didn't have control over this decision. And my job was to make the company successful, not to be the CEO. It was to make the company successful. And what my role was, what my title was, did not matter. And so I was a chairman, I became the chairman, and then helped bring in, promote one of the people we'd brought in to CEO, because there was a team now that CEO had brought in, and I wanted to keep that team together. And so you sometimes you just have to step back for the sort of the good of the cohesion and make your best judgment call. Sometimes I think to myself in the middle of the night, should I have fought that one harder, Who knows? But I made the decision at the time, the company, success of the company is more important than whatever title I have.
Hard decision. Okay, Justin, here's one for you. How do you position or explain your failures in prior companies and not seem arrogant or cocky versus too humble in explaining failures of the past?
How do I position because I've said everything actually worked out in the end? I don't understand the question.
I think I think the person is asking in the narrative of talking about failures on the way to success, or sometimes failed failures, what's the right way to communicate your past track record in a way that you don't seem either too arrogant or too humble?
Yeah, here's what I tell every batch of, I'm a group partner on Y Combinator, so we fund these companies, and then I'm responsible with another partner or two for a quarter of them, basically. We can interact with all the companies, but I'm kind of the first line of defense for a quarter of the companies we fund. And what I tell my group at Y Combinator every 6 months is I just talk about my story. And I say we started this company, Justin TV. I'll give you the bridge version, which basically started off as me strapping a camera to my head to try to create a live reality TV show. This is about 4 engineers starting a startup. It turns out the show was mostly us on our computers, and it was extremely boring. But we eventually pivoted that with like very little experience to a platform, which grew over the course of years, and then basically ran its course and like ran out of steam and went to zero. While that was transitioning to zero, this is 5 years in, we looked at what was going on. We identified one of the things that was working on the site, and it was people playing video games, watching other people play video games, and that eventually became Twitch, which we sold for $1 billion. And so what I tell them, that took 8 years. What I tell people is like, if we can start a company with no experience based on starting from the base of trying to do our own like live reality TV show, nobody in this room has any excuse. It was a series of stupid ideas and failures that eventually led to, because we were always trying to learn, at least, even though sometimes we didn't, we always tried to learn, it eventually led to something that we were observing. We were in the position to observe our customers and identify something that could become big, and then pursue that. And so I think that, I think of my startup career as 90% failing or floundering in the dark, and then only 10% really identifying something successful and being in the right place at the right time to take advantage of that. And I don't know if that's humble or not, but I don't think I'm that smart of a guy. I think I'm an average. We were average. We're average for Silicon Valley. Smart-ish. Weren't that great programmers, but we just figured things out, and we were survivors and resilient. And I think those are traits that anyone can learn. So I don't think I'm exceptional, and I think that those, our story is not. It's exceptional because it goes through these exceptionally bad ideas, but I don't think it's something that is unachievable by anyone. I think that it should be the example that anyone can be successful here working in technology.
It's actually not that unusual for people to say they're the 10% that succeeded, but actually you are exceptional because not that many people have had the journey that you have, but thank you for sharing that. What is the most common problem, fear of failure or not learning from mistakes? What do you think?
Not learning from mistakes. That's an easy one. Fear, I don't know that I've come across fear of failure as a problem.
Right. I think everyone sets out, thinking we're going to make this work. So you're not coming out at it from a perspective of worrying about failing.
Yeah.
Maybe in the darkest days, in the end, But then by that time, there's no point in being afraid of failing. You're failing. You're going down. Yeah. That's it. Right. But not learning. Right. That I've seen, and that's fatal. Yeah.
Last question. So what makes a failure fatal?
That's pretty
not
easy.
Learning.
Death.
Running out of money.
Out of money.
Right. So.
Running out of money.
Running out of money.
Yeah.
And I'll tell a story about a company another one of my companies, SpikeSource. So we were an open source stack management company. Started the company basically to bring open source to small to medium businesses and do all the difficult work of managing all those components in the stack for people. And we started this company, and then the Great Recession hit, and here we are, an open source software company in a very bad market, the second bursting of the bubble. And we had investors that just did not want to continue to put money into the company and kind of see it through, weather the storm. There are other open source companies that did and that now have large buildings with neon lights on 101. So that's back to that persevere thing. But you got to have money in the bank to do that, and you got to have investors who are willing to stick with you and stick with the company. And in our case, the investors decided to sell the company. So that's just a decision again. You don't always have control over. But one lesson coming out of that for me also has been maximize degrees of control over outcomes. Because, again, a lot of this is timing. It's just a matter of timing. And if you're willing to stay with it and, build what you think can be built, and it takes a little while longer, it's nice to be able to do that and not be forced to make decisions you don't want to make.
Yeah.
Last.
So, yeah, I just wanted to share, when I was a lad, actually, not exactly, but when I was a lad, I had the great, wonderful, good fortune to be mentored by Craig Johnson. Craig Johnson is one of the gods of Silicon Valley from my point of view. He founded Venture Law Group many years ago, and Craig had this saying, he told every entrepreneur, the number one cause of death is running out of money. And, I said, Craig, well, that's kind of obvious. That's kind of... And he said, no, it's profound. It is profound. Because, if you run out of money, you have no degrees of freedom. You have no oxygen left. You have no chance to recover. And so we talk about failure in the valley, but there are two very different types of failure. And so what I thought we were going to talk about was the Day of the Dead, which is ultimate failure, right? But what we talk about in a positive term in the Valley is the importance of this iterative failure to get to the right answer. The quote, from the beginning, my focus is not failing fast, my focus is succeeding in the long run. And so if you create a culture in your organization that says try everything, keep trying, because most of those things are going to fail, so that you have the opportunity to pivot, so you can discover that, who would have thought people want to watch other people play video games? Who would have thunk it? Could you imagine pitching that to a VC? I got a great idea. Right? There's not a single VC in Silicon Valley who would say that's a $1 billion idea. Right?
We got that.
So, two very different types of failure. And so to avoid failure that is fatal, you just got to husband your cash, however little or much it is, and then do all these little failures to make sure you succeed in the long run.
That's a great wrap up. So Justin, Kim, and Bill, thank you for sharing your stories of failure and Silicon Valley style failure. Join me in thanking our 3 panelists tonight.